This week's story, My Final Client, the Collector, written by Super Distance 2457.
People like to think the life of a high-end escort is glamorous. Luxury hotels, expensive dinners, enviable vacations, men who worship you with gifts. And sure, sometimes it is. But it's also a world where power is currency, and the men who have it are often darker than anyone realizes. I've met politicians, tech billionaires, and heirs to empires, but none of them unnerved me like him. Anton von Teufel, the kind of man who only exists in myths and nightmares. It started with a phone call from my agency. My handler, Veronica, sounded nervous, which wasn't like her. "This one's different," she said, her voice taut. "Old money, real old. You'll meet him at his estate, no public venues, no hotels." "Why me?" I asked, more curious than worried. "He requested you specifically." That wasn't unusual. I had a reputation for being discreet and professional. But there was something in her tone, an edge that unsettled me. The estate was a 2-hour drive from the city, buried deep in the woods. The directions wound through narrow, unmarked roads that twisted like veins. The trees were dense, their shadows so thick they seemed alive. By the time I reached the gates, the sun was setting, casting the mansion in hues of deep orange and crimson. The gates creaked open on their own, and the driveway stretched endlessly toward a mansion that looked more like a Gothic cathedral. Its towering spires seemed to scrape the sky, and the windows glowed faintly, as though the house itself was breathing. A man in a black suit greeted me at the door. His face was pale and gaunt, his expression void of warmth. He didn't introduce himself, just motioned for me to follow. The house was cavernous, the air heavy with the faint scent of roses, and something else I couldn't place, something metallic, like blood. Anton was waiting in the library, sitting in an enormous leather chair by the fire. He was older than I expected, mid-50s maybe, but handsome in that weathered, aristocratic way. His salt and pepper hair was swept back, and his tailored suit hugged his frame like it had been sewn onto him. His presence was magnetic, the kind that made it hard to look away.
"You're even more exquisite than I was told,"
he said, his voice smooth and deliberate. "Thank you," I replied, slipping into my professional charm. He didn't touch me, didn't move closer. He just studied me, his eyes sharp and unrelenting, like he was memorizing every detail of my face.
"Do you like games?"
he asked suddenly. "Depends on the game." His lips curled into a thin smile.
"Good. I like a woman with an adventurous spirit."
That was our first meeting. He didn't ask for anything physical, just talked. His words were strange, full of riddles and half-truths. He spoke of beauty and power, of how true worth lay in what couldn't be seen. When I left that night, he handed me an envelope. Inside was $50,000. I should have walked away. Something about him set my nerves on edge, but the money was too good. Over the next few weeks, I visited him several more times. Each time was the same: cryptic conversations, no touching, and another envelope of cash. Then, one night, he asked me to stay.
"It's late,"
he said, pouring me a glass of wine from a crystal decanter. The liquid shimmered in the firelight like molten rubies.
"Why not spend the night? I have a guest room prepared for you."
I hesitated, but the wine was already in my hand, and his gaze made it hard to say no. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. The room was beautiful but cold, decorated in rich velvets and dark woods. The bed was massive, draped in crimson silk that looked untouched. I locked the door and climbed into bed, but sleep wouldn't come. At around 3 a.m., I heard it. Faint footsteps in the hallway, followed by a low, guttural noise that didn't sound human. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming at me to stay still. The noise grew louder, joined by a soft scraping, like nails on wood. It was coming from the other side of the door. "Hello?" My voice cracked as I whispered. The scraping stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then a voice, low and distorted, like it was being dragged from a deep well.
"Let me in."
I froze, my breath hitching. The voice came again, more insistent.
"Let me in."
The doorknob rattled violently, the sound echoing in the silent room. I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and held it like a weapon, my knuckles white. The rattling stopped abruptly. Then came the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. When morning came, I found Anton waiting for me in the dining room, his smile as sharp as ever.
Did you sleep well?
He asked, sipping his coffee. I stared at him, trying to read his expression. "What was that last night?"
What was what?
He asked, his tone as smooth as the marble floor. The noise outside my door, the voice. He set his cup down and leaned forward, his eyes glinting like a predator's.
You must have been dreaming.
I knew he was lying, but I didn't press him. I just wanted to get out of that house. As I was leaving, he handed me another envelope.
One last thing.
He said.
I'd like to show you my collection sometime. I think you'd appreciate it.
I didn't respond, but curiosity got the better of me. A week later, I agreed to see it. He led me down a narrow staircase to a locked door. The air grew colder with each step, and my stomach churned with unease. "What's in there?" I asked, my voice trembling. He smiled, the kind of smile that made you want to run.
Beauty preserved forever.
When he opened the door, the smell hit me first, chemical and cloying. The room was lined with glass cases, each one containing a figure so lifelike I thought they were mannequins at first. Then I looked closer. Their eyes were too real, their expressions frozen in terror.
You see?
Anton said, his voice soft.
True beauty transcends life. It becomes eternal.
I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. "You're insane," I whispered. He stepped closer, his smile widening.
You're perfect, you know. You'd make a fine addition.
I ran. I didn't even know how I managed to make it out of that house. My memory of the escape is a jumbled haze of blind panic, my heart thundering in my chest as I fled through those vast halls. The walls seemed to close in on me, the air growing thicker, suffocating. My heels clattered against the marble floors, the sound echoing like gunshots in the stillness. I could feel Anton's eyes on me, though I never dared look back. His voice followed me, low and calm, as if he didn't even need to chase me to catch me.
You can't outrun beauty, my dear.
He called out.
It has already claimed you.
When I finally burst through the front doors, the cold night air hit me like a slap, and I nearly stumbled down the steps. The estate's grounds were a labyrinth of shadows and looming trees, but I didn't care where I was running as long as it was away from that house. The forest swallowed me. Branches clawed at my skin and hair, the scent of damp earth filling my nose as I stumbled and tripped over roots and stones. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I kept going until the mansion's eerie glow was nothing but a distant memory. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked by the estate's wrought iron gates. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before finally jamming one into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I peeled away from that place, my tires screeching against the gravel. But even as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The shadows outside the car seemed too dark, too dense, as if they were alive and watching. By the time I reached the city, I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. I checked into the first motel I saw, a dingy place with flickering neon lights, and barricaded myself in the room. I didn't bother with the bed. I sat on the floor in the corner, clutching the lamp from the nightstand like it could protect me. Hours passed. My mind raced with images of Anton's collection, the frozen faces locked in glass cases, their eyes pleading for release. I thought about his words. Beauty, preserved forever. I wanted to tell myself it was some elaborate nightmare, But the smell of those chemicals, the glint of terror in their eyes, was too vivid, too real. Then just as I was starting to think I might be safe, I heard it. A soft knock at the door. My heart stopped. "Who's there?" My voice cracked as I shouted, though deep down I didn't want an answer. Silence. I crept toward the door, pressing my ear against the cheap wood. My pulse thundered in my ears as I peered through the peephole. Nothing. I exhaled shakily, backing away. Maybe it was just my imagination, paranoia playing tricks on me. Then I heard it again. The sound of something sharp dragging along the door.
Let me in.
The voice was low and distorted, the same one I'd heard outside my room at Anton's estate. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the floor, clutching my mouth to keep from screaming. The doorknob rattled violently as though someone or something was trying to force it open.
Let me in.
The voice repeated, more insistent this time. I scrambled backward, my body trembling. "Go away!" I shouted, but my voice sounded small, powerless. The rattling stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. My breaths came in shallow gasps, my ears straining for any sound. Then, slowly, the door creaked. The lock hadn't turned, but the door was opening anyway, inch by agonizing inch. Beyond it was darkness, thick and impenetrable, like the void itself was staring back at me. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, paralyzed by fear as a shadow began to spill into the room, twisting and writhing like smoke.
You can't run from me.
The voice said, now clearer and closer, reverberating inside my skull. The shadow stretched toward me, and I felt its coldness wrap around my legs, dragging me forward. I clawed at the floor, my nails splintering against the cheap carpet, but it was no use. The darkness consumed everything it touched, swallowing the walls, the furniture, the light. The last thing I saw was my reflection in the cracked motel mirror. My face looked different, distorted, wrong. My eyes weren't mine anymore. They were hollow, lifeless, the same as the figures in Anton's collection. And then, the world went black. When I woke up, I was back in the mansion. But I wasn't in my body. I was inside the glass. I could see everything, the room, the cases, the other faces staring back at me, their mouths frozen in silent screams. I tried to scream too, but no sound came out. My body wouldn't move. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own reflection. And somewhere in the distance, I heard Anton's voice, calm and unhurried.
Welcome to the collection.
Thanks for tuning in. If you have a scary story you'd like me to share, send it my way. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more chills. Until next time, sleep tight, if you can.